is Lost Soul Aside. They posted this up on their official account.
Hello,
Saying,
hello,
during
hello.
China Joy
This is
on
it.
July 26th, so later this week, game director Yang Bing will give an interview. Gameplay will be streamed during that time, so keep your eyes open. And we have been wondering for a little while now if Lost Soul Aside would get its release date, because while it was shown off for the first time back in 2016, it was enough for to go into PlayStation's China Hero project, and really ever since then it's just been in development behind the scenes, occasionally peeking out to show off some gameplay or a trailer. But it has been rated in China, and we're actually expecting it to come out before the end of this year, so maybe this is a good spot for them to make the official announcement for the release date, but I guess we'll find out here in a couple of days. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a bit of, again, a warning for Switch owners, as this post went viral online, and you can kind of see why right away. This was over on Reddit, where a person put up a picture of their special or limited edition Switch missing some of its etching. You might be wondering, why is it missing that? Well, they say don't clean your Switch with designs with rubbing alcohol. They used 91% rubbing alcohol to clean all their electronics, and have never had an issue before. Didn't expect it to completely take off the design. We're currently in mourning and debating on buying another Tears of the Kingdom Switch just for the back plate. Hey, unless someone knows where to buy a replacement one with this design. Sometimes you'll see them pop up on places like eBay. It's not as frequent, though. I think with something like a newer one like this, especially with the OLED Switch model, those seem to be a bit more sporadic when they get listed. But maybe in a few years you'll see them randomly pop up. However, how authentic are they? That's another question to have there. But in this case, using 91% rubbing alcohol will indeed have this effect on certain plastics. It does depend, obviously, on the plastic itself, what was being used here during creation from these companies. But with the etchings that Nintendo is using, yes, they seem to be very vulnerable to things like 91% rubbing alcohol. Over on Nintendo's website, they do recommend seemingly 70% rubbing alcohol, but even that, it's not really that necessary. So with 70%, it's more diluted, obviously 91% to 70%. But when it comes to plastics, you can just use warm water and soap. I mean, I would still recommend using like a toothbrush to get around certain crevices and stuff. I feel like people get really, really worried when they hear electronic and water, just because we've always been trained to keep the two completely separate. And for the most part, you should. Like, don't dunk your Switch, obviously, in the sink or something. But generally, that's the safest
Don't you
and
switch.
most effective way to clean up a system that may just be dirty, whether it's with dust or just like complete grime. Using just a toothbrush, a little cup with warm water and some soap, like just hand soap is fine usually, like degreasing soap, and then you can just kind of scrub away at the device, in this case the Switch. So yeah, rubbing alcohol, if you use that on controllers, it'll sort of take this top layer off of it, and that can also affect the feel and even the look, especially if it's kind of a glossy surface. You'd be surprised. 91% alcohol rubbing alcohol can definitely tear up certain surfaces like that. But it's really just used mostly for, say, a PCB. So if you're working on a motherboard, typically use 91% rubbing alcohol. It will generally evaporate very, very quickly and won't leave much debris behind at all. And I mostly brought this up because there are people in the comments for that Reddit thread who said they had no idea, and they probably would have used 91% alcohol on a system at some point in the future, whether it's a Switch that's limited edition with the etchings or another. So for the most part, again, warm water, soap, or according to Nintendo, 70% rubbing alcohol is fine. So that's kind of the route I would go with it. Just sort of a heads up for the future, just to hopefully save you some money. Next up, let's talk about Gamescom opening night live. Of course, that'll be happening at the end of August to kick off Gamescom. And this is another Jeff Keighley show. It coincides basically with what he does with Summer Game Fest and the Video Game Awards at the end of the year. But people have always wondered, how much does it cost to have a spot there? Because we see games, of course, show up, big name games, like we have like Monster Hunter Wilds was at a recent Jeff Keighley event, and others. And how much does it cost, obviously, for advertisements? It's something that has been a pretty big mystery for people. Well, we have some figures we can go over here, and again, it definitely shocked many people online how expensive it is to have, say, a 30-second or
100,000?
60-second spot in this show.
Is it
So think about how you
100,000?
go through and basically like commercial after commercial after commercial. Yes, they're game trailers, but they are there to sell you on a product. Still, though, we can see this is posted up, and this is according to Raptor, as they spotted this.
200, a quarter million USD.
$288,000.
Quarter million,
get
man.
A spot on the main opening night live show. Of course, there's still a pre-show that happens, and there are spots there. Apparently, that is actually cheaper, which would make sense.
Max price, 120-second spot.
Viewership during the
90-second
event.
Oh, still 200,000 and 34.
That is the max price. That's with a
30-second is 100,000
during that broadcast.
Wow.
Now you can also opt for a 90-second spot that's $234,000, 60 seconds that's $179,600, and 30 seconds that will run you, let's say, roughly $125,000.
The amount of money, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. Not cheap. I mean, here's the thing. We know Jeff Keighley has talked about with all of his shows, millions of people tune in, and that is, of course, factored into how much it costs to have a spot at these shows, and it has gone up, which, again, viewership has gone up, and I do think that's one of the reasons, obviously, that Jeff will go out there after a show and be like, look how many millions of people tuned in across all these different live streams. We had the entire world of gaming having their eyes on this presentation that night. It's, of course, to sell packages to these different companies. Now, it is important to note, though, there are some games out there, and I mentioned Monster Hunter Wilds, that's probably a good example, that it doesn't cost them money because they are, I guess, be a quote-unquote tentpole announcement. One, that people go in to the event looking for, so to have it there is worth it on its own rather than try to convince, say, Capcom to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to show off a game that they already know is going to sell stupid amounts of copy when it launches, if it's at, say, Opening Night Live or the Game Awards or Summer Game Fest or not. And I do want to say, while these figures were shocking, again, to people online, it's always kind of been like the E3 is out of control, well, was out of control at one point in time, costing millions and millions of dollars to be in attendance just on the show floor. While these figures are just for Opening Night Live, it doesn't count the show floor at Gamescom. Still, it's not cheap, basically, to advertise your product or your game at any of these like high-profile events. But there you go. Now we at least have an idea or a ballpark for some of the money that these different games are paying out to be in front of you that night. Next up, let's talk about a very impressive project in the modding community that is working to make, I think, like the smallest game console we've seen so far. Specifically, taking a console that already exists and shrinking it down, and that being the Wii. They're working to make that system actually fit on your keychain. Seriously, take a look at this. This is posted up, again, over on Twitter X. This is from Westmods. Says they've been cooking up something special over the past year or so. Happy to show it off. A Wii console the size of a keychain. I mean, check this thing out. This is really, really cool. They has the Nintendo Kawaii, CNC'd, anodized, laser marked, passively cooled. And that's the big thing, because if it wasn't, well, the footprint would basically be the size of the fan. That's how small they're aiming to have this thing. And in fact, over on the forums that they link to here, they show off internal shots of this. And a lot of this comes down to really the community figuring out how to cut down the Wii motherboard to the size. Like, really, they cut it down with a Dremel, and they have to rearrange certain parts. Like, there's a little bit of rewiring that happens, but no, the Wii, it's actually a very resilient motherboard to get to that size. Yes, you still have to keep the processor, the GPU, and that stuff intact in its section of the board along with the memory, but for the most part, everything else can be rewired and shaped to fit into this small enclosure. And in order to make this work,
impressive,
because
actually.
remember, you would still have to have, if you want to have GameCube support, which I assume most people do, or power input or a power button, we'd also have to have all of those things be accounted for with the footprint. And rather than try to attach to the main system, they created a dock. That is an incredibly clever solution here, by the way, as it seems to be customized completely. I look at this thing. So, a really, really cool stuff here. Now, they are working to basically crowdfund orders to send out so they can have all this stuff anodized, set up, developed, and then sent back to everyone. So I believe right now they're just pulling orders. So, hey, if you're interested, you can go over and see what the situation is there. But they have a comparison shot to the Short Stack and the GameCube Nano, and this thing is, I mean, it looks significantly smaller than both of those, and the Short Stack is the size of a pack of playing cards for the Wii. I thought that was the smallest we were going to get that system. Nope. The modding community just keeps on impressing. Really, really cool stuff. It'd be interesting to take a shot at that. It would, because right now that seems to be a big trend for the modding community, is actually taking systems and making them smaller. Not necessarily turning them just into handhelds, but just legitimately making them small. There's a PS2 Slim that I wouldn't mind taking a shot at either, because you don't actually have to carve down the motherboard at all. And that might be a bit more approachable for just viewers out there who want to take on a weekend project. So maybe that's the next one I'll go to, but I'm going to keep my eye on the Kauai, because that might be set up for a tech wave down the road, we'll see. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Microsoft and their Game Pass tiers that did see a bit of a shakeup recently. But there are also questions around cheaper tiers as well. They've mostly just made the service more expensive. But we have heard rumors around the idea of maybe an ad-supported free tier, or one that's just based on cloud. We can see this actually over on Windows Central. This is a report from Jez Corden, who says, I've heard that Microsoft is working towards a cloud-only version of its subscription that would be cheaper and more approachable to buy than Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. This would be designed around users who simply aren't interested in buying an Xbox console, which could include competing console platform players. So first thing, I think it is important for Microsoft to come up with a cloud-only tier, because GeForce Now has that, Amazon Luna has that, and it would work, of course, to make it so that you don't have to sell people on a $20 per month tier if they just want to do cloud streaming through this Fire Stick TV initiative they have now, because otherwise they're going to be buying two things they don't really care for then. I mean, they're not going to take advantage of it, whether it's PC or console. They just want to just stream it maybe through the Fire Stick or other platforms that support it. So if you get that cost down, I would even say significantly, if you're just doing cloud stuff, it might be like a $7, $8 a month thing. Maybe they push for 10, but it has to be pretty cheap to be competitive with some of the other services, considering Microsoft is kind of lagging behind, to me, when it comes to quality, latency, basically everything across the board for that streaming experience. The other thing that's brought up here that's very, very interesting is the idea that it would work maybe on other platforms, like competing platforms like PlayStation or Nintendo. That's interesting, because then you could have a curated list from that device, and that might be a big hang-up for Sony or even Nintendo. If Microsoft can make it so that you only access first-party Xbox games, say from your Switch or from your PlayStation, so it does not compete directly with third-party sales, they might be more open to that, and that might be the path. Yes, you'd still be streaming this stuff on your Switch, your next-generation system from Nintendo, or on your PlayStation 5, but it's better than just not having it there. And if it's just a subscription service and Game Pass works into that to where you can have it more on just like a whim, like, oh, I will go ahead and fire up Gears 5 or something just for fun to try it out here on the PlayStation. No downloads, no updates. It's right then and there for, I'll even say $10 a month. That might be compelling to many people out there, but that is something Microsoft, I think, absolutely has to figure out, because having Game Pass Ultimate be the only way to access cloud and then also try to push this Fire Stick thing is just very, very weird. They definitely have to set that up a bit better to have a more approachable tier for people who just want to stream. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, Switch owners, do you use a special edition system as your main device? 78% say no. 22% though say yes, they are using a limited edition or special edition system. I'm sure there are people out there who buy the systems. I obviously have seen it. There are plenty of people I know even who just have them boxed and they just leave them, and they're like, hey, it's really cool to collect these systems. But still, I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who buy the limited edition system because they like the franchise, like the way it looks, and they do use it. Like, there are Joy-Cons that I had been using from the Skyward Sword one. I just have been using those. I think they're really cool. But for, like, my Switch, it's just the standard OLED model. But, yeah, I also have Switch systems that are just, like, the limited edition ones that are like, just for collection's sake. So, interesting, though, that it is up to 22% here, and shows that Nintendo's strategy to do some of these special editions has worked, although I feel like they could have done much more with certain limited edition ones, especially when we got to look at like the Mario edition where they changed the entire thing to red.
It's a bug.
That I think would have been a lot more fun for Nintendo to play around with throughout this generation. But hey, maybe next gen they decide to get a bit more serious with some of the looks around the consoles to coincide with the franchise that they have the limited edition set up for. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Vone, who says, "You're wrong, Spawnwave. SVC Chaos SNK versus Capcom was not an Xbox exclusive in North America back then. It was also on Neo Geo AES in North America as well. Thing is, not many people own a Neo Geo AES, so nobody knows about it. That is true. It was on the Neo Geo AES. I was more referring to when they ported it to PS2 and Xbox. Didn't come out on the PS2 in North America, just on Xbox, but you are right. You could have bought it for the AES console, which, by the way, I wanted to look just to see what pricing was on that cartridge, because Neo Geo AES was expensive when it came out. It's even more expensive now, and I think there are different versions of this game. I think there's like different regions, obviously, whether it's in Japan or the English version or just the North American version, and there's a range of prices up to $2,500 for it complete. If you have a Neo Geo collection, you're sitting pretty right now. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Whereas the warning for Switch owners when it comes to 91% rubbing alcohol on the Switch. Hopefully the image of that Tears of the Kingdom Switch missing half its etching didn't cause you too much pain. And also, what about the Gamescom prices for these different companies to have 30, 60, 90-second ad spots in these shows? And the Wii, as small enough to fit on your keychain, what system would you actually like to see get that small so you can take it wherever you go? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.
It's time to durability test the Samsung Z Flip 6. I promised last year that if the Z Flip 5 survived my durability test, I would switch to it. I was fascinated with the futuristic form factor, so I moved my whole life over to this flippy phone and learned within 2 days that the folding smartphone life is not the life for me. I use my phone a lot, and the opening and folding motion drove me absolutely insane. Instead of just reaching for my phone and being able to use it instantly, I would have to pull it out of my pocket, figure out which direction was up, open it before I could use it, and then repeat the whole process to close it again. It sounds petty, but multiply that by 50 times a day. It was like that water droplet torture, just wearing me down little by little, eroding my sanity, and shaving little bits of my happiness off like a carrot headed to a salad. I absolutely
Makes a lot of
could not
sense.
handle it, so after about 30 days, I switched to the more rectangular Galaxy S24 Ultra. Flip phones are super cool and probably work great for someone who's not working from their phone, but yeah, flip phones are not for me. Something that is for me, though, is Liquid IV, the #1 powdered hydration brand in the USA and the sponsor of this video. You hear of batteries having something called an electrolyte, which is the space between the positive and negative terminals which allow the electrons to flow. And human bodies are the same way. We need electrolytes to regulate those chemical reactions that happen within our cells to give us energy. So if you're feeling under the weather or being tired a lot, being low on electrolytes could be one of the reasons. These scientifically formulated, flavored Liquid IV packets contain sodium, potassium, and essential B vitamins, 3 times the electrolytes of other sports drinks. So as I gear up for strenuous activities like running, going to the gym, or durability testing a Z Flip 6, I rip open a Liquid IV packet to make sure I have the hydration I need on a cellular level. These powders
Talking
have
about
no
hydration, I
artificial
should
colors or
drink.
sweeteners and have several sugar-free options. Drinking water is great, but you need to find a way to get electrolytes, and Liquid IV hydration multipliers makes that easy. Get a 20% discount using my code with the link in the description, and thanks to Liquid IV for sponsoring this video.
The Flip 6 is incredibly and suspiciously similar to the Flip 5. At first glance, it has the same internal screen warnings as the previous generations, like don't press too hard, don't fold too hard, and don't take off the internal screen protector. But one thing I did notice fairly immediately is that the internal
Less crease,
screen
huh?
crease has been significantly reduced. It is still there for sure, but from a reflection point of view, it is much more minimal than it used to be. There's barely even a squiggle from the reflection of my colored plastic pry tools. This could be the result of the new shear thickening fluid, a flexible screen manufacturing process that
No, I'm
Samsung
stuck.
has invented, or it could be that the older generation Flip 5 has been used for a month. It's hard to know for sure. Another small tweak is that instead of 3 earpiece slits, the newer Flip 6 has 4, and there's just a general more squared off design all around the outside edges. The inner screen of the Flip 5 being plastic honestly didn't bother me too much while using it, which is good since it looks like the new sheer thickening fluid screen on this new version also has the same level of scratch resistance, scratches at a level 2 with deeper grooves at a level 3, and fingernails can still leave permanent marks on that top layer. The outer screen is a respectable 3.4 inches, and since it's made with Gorilla Glass Victus 2, we start seeing scratches at a level 6 with deeper grooves at a level 7. Samsung said they've enhanced the frame of the Flip 6. Instead of armor aluminum, it's now enhanced armor aluminum. The recessed power button and volume rocker are both metal, and the top of the Flip 6 has more aluminum.
The problem with Once Human. I've been playing this game a lot. There's me right there. Ooh, okay. All right. And accept. Threat detected. Okay, so what do I do? I just kill these little bugs? Seems easy. What the fuck? It's a joke. Okay. Yeah, I finally get him. Yeah. So I have to actually aim? What do you mean I have to aim? Oh, okay, okay. Damage. Fires projectiles that create lingering arrow. Okay, that seems really good. It's a new weapon. Yeah, that seems insane. C is auto. Oh, nice. Okay, good. Thank God. I was gonna have to play the game. I was really worried about that. Okay, fires a crescent-shaped orbiting projectile.
Play the
okay,
game.
yeah, we're gonna go with this too. This is like Bible or something? Yeah, this is way better. Holy shit, this does way more damage. Oh my God. This is way better. Bro, I'm a god.
Vampire Survivor.
Okay, okay, here we go. Ooh, I took damage. These crawly boys are dangerous, man. Use 3? Wait, 3? What does 3 do? Cyclonic slicers. Okay, let's go with that. E? What the fuck was that? Okay. Why am I so fast? Jesus.
Welcome back to the Nerd Nest podcast, everybody. We've got a full house today. The whole gang is here, and we are here to talk mostly, if I had to look around and see where it was, about the ROG Ally X. The embargo is done. We've had these things for about a month at this point, and we want to talk all about the different features about this. But before we get there, Russ, how's your week been going, man? What's new?
Man, it is... I am the king of underestimating how much work goes into making a video. You'd think after making 600 plus of these videos, I would know. But man, I was like Thursday. I was like, okay, if I get myself Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all day, I will be able to make a full ROG Ally X video. And today's Sunday, as we're recording this, and I still need to finish after the podcast because I have just so much work. I ended up after editing down, I ended up with about an hour and a half of just pure gameplay footage. And that's cutting things down into 10-second segments. So, yeah, so I've been overworked and whatever, but I'm going to be very proud of this video. And I'm going to break it up into 2 because I have so much gameplay. I'm going to make a second gameplay video specifically. So
very cool. I can't wait to see that. Rich, what about you, man?
I decided to take it easy after the Bazai Ally X video. I'm like, I'm not going to try to rush a review with everybody else making a review. So I've been taking it easy this weekend. I've been having fun with the family and enjoying my Ally X.
Very cool. Carrie, what about you, man? What's new?
I'm right in lockstep with Russ. For me, it's like the problem was I was like fantasizing in my head like how I was gonna like hit these things because it's like a revelation in terms of like perfectly lining them up like one for one and like look. There's no effing difference. But here, there is, and I'm going through it all in my head, and I'm like, wait, I didn't actually record anything. That was all existing in my head. Ah, crap. So yeah, I'm still working on it as well right now.
My video is done. It's going up today. Or tonight. Well, tomorrow. I haven't decided because the embargo's at like 1 a.m. But by the time people watch this, it will already have been out. Because this episode's going to come out on Tuesday because I don't want this episode to compete with my video, which comes out on Monday. But the same thing. I spent a lot of time working on this video. And I'm really happy with it. There's benchmarks, there's battery tests and stuff in there, but it has been kind of a bear to make that video, and I'm looking forward to the days of just sitting down and doing a talking head news video, because the amount of effort required to just react to, video game news is a lot less than it is to try and evaluate a device. By the way, if you guys have not yet already seen Rich's video about Bazite, I also have installed Bazite, and it's awesome, and you guys should go watch that video. I'll be sure to link everybody's videos in the description down below, so make sure that you go and watch all of those after you watch this one. But let's get started. And I
guess I was supposed to
what I wanted to talk about here. I want
balls
to talk
with
first
cables
about ergonomics for the ROG Ally X, because we've had this for a month, and I want to start with Russ, because I know that Russ, in your first impressions video, you feel like this is less comfortable, and I feel like you're the outlier, although I'll let the other guys speak for themselves. I feel like you're the outlier as far as comfort when it comes to the Ally X. Talk about that.
Yeah, so it's I mentioned it. Yeah, I call it my second look video, because I did the one in New York and then the one when I had the engineering sample. So we now have the retail unit, so it's basically the same thing. There's no big difference between them at all. And ergonomics, yeah, it's one of those where it's naturally more ergonomic, where I feel like it's more rounded and it fits your hands. The moment you pick it up, you're like, oh yeah, this definitely is well made, But I found that because of its weight and because of this tiny little, there's a little shelf right here on the bottom, and I'm trying to get it to focus in. Yeah, so this little shelf right here makes it so that my pinkies kind of go underneath like this, and so I end up holding it with my pinkies down below like that, and that causes me a little bit of, I don't know how to explain this in a nice sounding way, but it just causes pinky pain, and it's just a weird feeling. And so I've over the past month or so, I've kind of come to pull that back a little bit and say, I've trained myself to just not put my pinkies down there and just remind myself, oh, hold it this way instead, hold it this way instead. Put the weight on your palms as opposed to putting it on the back of your fingers. And that's kind of solved it for me, but it is still something I have to kind of give as maybe a warning or something like, hey, if you get this thing, just make sure you don't put your pinkies down below and kind of train your hands. We had to train our hands with the other one too, because it was a flatter kind of feeling. And so I've come to become accustomed to it at this point. I got no big problem with it now, but yeah, it was something that was just a weird, my hands had to get used to the ROG Ally X, much like how they had to with the original Ally 2, but in different ways.
What about you, Carrie?
I love it. I don't have any pinky problems whatsoever. I didn't even notice any pinky problems, to be quite honest. Yeah. The entire bit. I think the only part that I don't like, and I've had this happen a number of times now, is that my thumbs have an easier time hitting the ROG Ally quick access menu keys than start and select. Whenever I have to hit start and select, I'm always like, oh crap, let me reposition my hand and overextend my thumb just to hit it, because where my hands sit is a little bit lower on the device itself, and my thumbs can easily hit those quick access menu, but it's few and far between, so it's not that big of a deal. Overall, how the triggers feel, the D-pad is a big improvement. I still think it's could do better. It's better, much better than it was, but there's still a whole other level of better D-pads. But yeah, overall, how they've positioned everything, where they were. Honestly, those macro buttons on the back, the only reason I've ever used them is to assist me with benchmarking. So one is to just launch a TDP menu, and the other one is to just be the hotkey for capturing. So it's that's the only thing. But after I'm done doing this, I'm just going to disable them. So I'm one of those people that doesn't have much use for the macro keys in the back. But yeah, overall, where they hit everything ergonomically, the M keys, those back keys, fall right where my middle fingers are, much better than the original Ally. The original Ally was like this weird blob that was there that I had to like push in, like almost push up to like activate better. So I think that they just nailed it across the board and a lot of different things. And one of the, I think we mentioned it in the Discord, right? Like the indentation for the fingerprint sensor is just a nice little touch to better when you're like noodling around with your finger without looking at it. You can feel for it better. And it's just these little touches all over that Asus did a really good job with.
Yeah, that was, and it even feels different from the retail unit to the.
Oh, this is nice. I don't have to do anything. I can
that
just
little scoop is a
stand
little
here
bit
and look at
more
my
prevalent.
units fighting.
What about you, Rich, for ergonomics?
Yeah, so real quick on the D-pad, I've had better D-pads certainly, but I will say not on a PC handheld. Would you agree with that, Carrie?
Let's go.
I can't think of another PC handheld that has a better D-pad.
So I'm very biased in this. So I like the PS Vita D-pad. And
oh yeah,
GPD does have them on there, and I've always really enjoyed them. They, oddly enough, GPD has mixed and matched them, which was odd to me. I had one person said, "Hey, this kind of sucks," and I'm like, "No way!" And he's like, "Look," and he's like pushing down, and the whole thing would like go inward, and it seemed like GPD made a change on the pivot point during production sometimes. So my pre-production to production was wildly different. I was like, "Oh, that's crazy." So I talked to them about that, and so I am biased towards that, and I prefer style.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
If we talk about membrane-based ones, I do prefer this over the Steam Deck's D-pad. But in terms of like other, like Ambernick has better D-pads that they've done, but they do a bazillion. Right. So, you know, it only took them 4 million tries.
The only one I can think of that I actually like better is the Ioneo Qun. Like, I actually really like that floating D-pad that they have there. And so I think that's probably my favorite rubber membrane D-pad.
Really? That's how you pronounce it.
But this one is super
not
excellent.
Qun.
One other thing, Carrie, is, you know, you can swap. I just went and checked. That's why you guys heard the sound of me turning on Armory Crate. In Armory Crate, you can just switch out the start and select with the Armory Crate buttons. So that would make it kind of solve your problems. That way you have to reach to hit those as opposed to start and select.
You should make a guide about that.
I was gonna brag. I was gonna brag about how Bazite not only can you do that, but you should do that. But I didn't know you can do that in Armory Crate. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I just checked. You just go into like your gamepad profiles, and then you can just adjust whatever, make any button any button.
I feel like that's like it's a classic Baldur's Gate 3 like analogy. Like the only problem with me not doing anything is my own knowledge to think that it's not possible, and that is like my own thing holding me back. I'm like, they didn't do that, so I don't even look. It's one of those things.
Yeah, I will say
it's. Go ahead, Rich.
I will say overall, I love the ergonomics. I can't decide whether or not I like it better than the Steam Deck OLED in terms of ergonomics, but I will say that when I'm playing it, I never feel like, oh, I'm missing this specific feeling from the Steam Deck.
Oh, it's not this
like,
one.
These size handhelds are my Goldilocks zone. So like the smaller handhelds I cannot do whatsoever. The bigger handhelds like the Legion Go I can absolutely do, but these like this mid-size for a PC handheld, it just feels perfect for me.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. Well, first of all, ergonomics-wise, I still think that the Steam Deck is way, way better than the ROG Ally X
come on,
when it
man.
comes to ergonomics. That being said,
there you
they
go.
went from, like, I think in my video I have like a scale of, you know, this is a 1, this is a 2, this is a 5 of like ergonomics, and the original ROG Ally, I think I put it at 2, with the only thing that it's better than is a Switch, and then the Ally X ergonomics, I would say it's a 4. Like they really improved it. It still doesn't have the big, beefy, super rounded handles of the Steam Deck, but I don't get physically tired playing this. I'm getting zero pinky pain. Since you guys brought up the controls, specifically the D-pad, this is not something that I really paid close enough attention to when I was making my video. It was only after I pretty much had my video in the can and done with just a couple of little edits to go that I decided I'm going to install
Wait, what happened?
EmuDeck on here, and because I bought a giant 4 terabyte M.2 drive
Wow,
to throw
4
in
terabyte.
here, and I was like, well, I'm going to throw all of my emulation stuff on there.
Yeah.
And then I loaded up Contra, and this D-pad fails the Contra test real bad, like real bad. It's great for fighting games, but man, oh man, platformers, you get a lot of accidental. And I guess I just didn't notice getting those accidental diagonals when I was just playing the games that I usually play. But going back in the Contra test and loading up like Super Mario Brothers 2 this morning because I wanted to check out black frame insertion with some shaders on there, and I'll talk about that later in the video or later in the podcast. So many accidental diagonals. Russ, you constantly do the I think it's the Russ test. I'm not sure if you came up with it or not, but the
I think
Contra
someone
test,
mentioned it to me first, but yeah.
oh, did they? Okay. Well, am I misinterpreting this, or did it fail the Contra test for you?
It does. So, but it's so I have it on a kind of different category because it's a Sega Saturn style D-pad. If you actually hold it up against a Sega Saturn D-pad, it's almost the exact same. It has a little bit less pivot, but otherwise, it feels very similar. So I call this like a rolling D-pad. And so I don't have the expectations of passing the Contra test because it's not built for that. The Sega Saturn D-pad would also fail it. And so it's one of those you kind of have to adjust to. And I don't mind it. You know, it's one of those where it is what it is and it does what I want it to. So I don't mind playing platformers with it. Like I can play Celeste with it, no problem and stuff. Bearing in mind that it's geared towards rolling, but I know when that diagonal is going to hit because I can kind of feel it happening as it happens. And it's maybe as just an old Sega guy, like it feels fine to me. And so, it's one of those where the black and white of the Contra test is always funny for me because it just starts the conversation. The pass-fail part of it doesn't really matter to me at all. It's whether or not we can describe it and articulate what's going on. And for me, the D-pad's good. And how often are you going to be playing, Contra on this thing? I don't know.
Yeah, I was playing Super Mario Brothers 2, and in that game, I know that you're a big fan of that game, Russ. In that game, you can fall off ladders. Like you can be climbing up and you can fall off the ladder if you go too far to the left or too far to the right. And that happened to me a lot. So even though most of the time when I play this, the D-pad is totally fine. For retro games, especially for Nintendo retro games, I feel like that's a bit of a weak point for it. All the other controls, though, are really fantastic. Carrie, you mentioned where the placement of the buttons are. I would say that, in my opinion, the best thing that they could have done is take those top buttons that are the start and the menu, or the menu and the view buttons, move them down to where the armory crate and a quick access menu, I forget what command center buttons are, and then take those buttons and put them down here below the D-pad and below the other stick. I think that would be a much better layout, but this is totally fine. Overall, the controls are really good.
Can I just petition this podcast to, we never have to say menu view option, right? Like we're the olds. We can say start
select.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to say start and select, but I will probably correct myself in my head because I know that it's wrong. I know that I am wrong when I say it. Although, fair. Real quick, where's the correct place to put an ABXY, Rich?
What do you mean?
ABXY, where does it go? Like,
where's
the X button?
I'm still Xbox style, right? So A on the bottom. That's me. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Russ?
when I look at Nintendo stuff, it just looks weird. Like, why is it backwards? Like, it just feels bizarre. Like BA? I'm reading left to right? No, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, I don't know why they did it, but they started it, so everybody should have followed what they did. What about you, Russ? Where's the correct placement of the X button?
There's a time and place, I think, so when it's like a retro handheld, I don't mind the A being on the right, but A on the bottom when you're playing PC or Android, I think that's probably the right way to go. The thing is, like, I'm at the point where I've hit the Zen, like nirvana, where I don't even look, I don't even care. It's a wonderful place to be. You just have to own a YouTube channel for 4 years and you finally get that. It's amazing.
Are you living next door to Russ there, Carrie?
Yeah, I mean, I think like hardcore gamers in general never really cared about button labels. We would just know where they were. The south button is jump, the west button is use or attack, and that's how, it's just placement of where it was. So it never really mattered all that much. I typically I use PC and stuff, and that always aligned with X input, so it's going to be the Sega style, which was what Xbox adopted anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's called Xbox now, Xbox face button. It's really just comes down to even like the asynchronous analog stick layout versus synchronous, and some people just have to have the analog sticks in line versus offset. And I prefer Xbox for both. But yeah, that's my answer for that.
So what I would do, I would say don't label them at all. Just take the labels off them completely, and then on the screen, and actually Rich Bazite does this, you can set it to have like platform agnostic button prompts. Right. And it shows you the 4 buttons and highlights the one that they're telling you to push. And I wish
it is
that
really
every
nice.
game
4
developer
button,
would do
it
that
highlight
from here on
which button
until
to
the
push.
end of
It
time.
is nice, yeah.
Because that is the superior way to do it.
I do feel like
I
you're
agree.
doing more of that, thankfully, right? Like especially with the Switch, starting with the Switch,
Yeah,
because
so
they
you
could
should do
be oriented one way or the other.
Yeah.
They had to use those diagrams. So I do think it's cool that more and more developers are doing that.
What do you guys think of the stick placement? Because they did adjust the stick placement just a little bit. For me, I noticed that if I'm taking the right stick and I'm fully deflecting it to the left, I sometimes tap the screen. And so if I'm playing a shooter, I shoot. And I shoot by accident while I'm turning a lot.
Yeah, I've had that, and it will look down. I guess, however, I'm touching the screen just ends up looking down. So I've definitely had that, but I've also had it with other handhelds. I don't think I've ever had it with the Steam Deck, but it is something where like you kind of have to get used to the range and making sure you're not touching the screen. Would be great if there was some better like protection against that, but it is something I can get used to, I think.
Like thumb rejection, like you put a border around the touchscreen when the analogs are engaged.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that would be fantastic. I think that overall, I mean, look, I'm nitpicking.
For sure.
We'll get to our real answers on if this is a good device or not in a little bit, but I think you guys can figure out exactly where I'm leaning on it. All right, so we talked about ergonomics. We talked about controls. Not talking about battery life yet. Let's talk about performance, especially because I know that I personally am not like benchmark guy. I did benchmarks in my video. I ran benchmarks, and I was like, I didn't know how to really, like, I looked at them. I was like, okay, this is what you're getting. I didn't know if that was good. I didn't know if that was bad because I haven't done a million benchmarks to compare that to. Carrie, I know that you've done a million benchmarks. And we would expect that this would have exactly the same performance as the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go. Well, close the ROG Ally, but we have more RAM, we have faster RAM. Performance-wise, how does this stacking up for you?
So it's interesting when you dial everything in and you make them one for one. There are going to be some instances where you're going to find that there is zero performance difference when looking at them at like older PC games that have no VRAM constraints or system RAM constraints, where you needed a certain amount of system RAM and a certain amount of VRAM. Those are pretty much lock on the same. And the reason being is when you take a look at how Asus kind of tunes their profiles, is they're CPU heavy. They don't really lean into the GPU as much as they should. So you kind of have to twiddle with that, but I didn't because I kept it more at a default state. Specifically, all of my tests were using the performance as the foundation performance mode. And then I would just tweak the TDP around that. And what you're finding is that on older PC games, they pretty much line up, despite the fact that we have effectively 17% more bandwidth between these two platforms. So we have a way to feed the GPU more, but even when we're pushing power into it, we're not extracting that performance difference. When even we're pushing a bunch of power into it at like 25 watt, you're getting closer to only 5 to 8% better performance. However, when you take a look at newer modern games like Cyberpunk, or Horizon Zero Dawn, or any new modern game that is going to have VRAM constraints when you're pushing certain settings, now all of a sudden your averages are a little bit better. But if you take a look at your 0.1 percentile and your 0.1 percentile, where you're going to have a lot of frame variances, where it's going to feel hitchy and stuttery, all of that is going to get smoothed out. And now you're looking at, 30% and 40% better 1 percentile frames, which is significant. And in terms of having a smoother gameplay experience, that's where that extra RAM is coming into play. Insofar as the bandwidth increase, we're not effectively seeing that. Funnily enough, when you look at this in my video, there's synthetic benches and GPU benches. We create different scenarios, right? CPU bound and GPU bound. In a CPU bound scenario, we see that performance difference match up.
How long did it took me?
The memory bandwidth
5
increase.
hours.
But in GPU bound scenarios, it's like 5 to 8%, which again, all of Asus's power profiles lean heavy on CPU. So that's where we're kind of seeing how it's tuned up. You would ideally tune it up better so that it, put like EPP 100 mode so that you're telling the system don't send a bunch of power to the CPU at all, kind of lean back and do more on GPU. So that's really where it comes down to, that Asus needs to open up Armory Crate a bit more so that we can fine tune more power configs rather than the boilerplate ones that they have. And even manual mode kind of sucks because it doesn't have the full range of power that it can go at, and they allow you to have PL1 and PL2 modes, which is the most silly thing you could do. On Steam Deck they haven't did it because it was the smart thing to do, and this has been since 2015. This has been a thing that we've always told people. You lock PL1 and PL2 to be the same number. In no world does anyone care, like, oh, let me put on performance mode, it says 17 watt. Well, for a glorious 90 seconds, it's going to be running at 24 watts. So for 90 seconds, it's going to feel great, and then it's going to feel sluggish all of a sudden. I don't know who would want that. But yeah, that's basically what it comes down to from a performance angle. It's in CPU-bound scenarios, you're going to get a bigger performance improvement. In GPU-bound scenarios, using the default stuff that Asus has, you're not going to see a giant increase outside of modern games that can better use the VRAM increase.
So, Rich, yesterday we were talking to the guy that makes handheld Daemon, or Demon. I don't know how to say it. I always said Daemon. It doesn't matter. And I feel like, based on what I took away from that conversation, that the stuff that Carrie's talking about, where you don't have as much control as you'd like, am I understanding it correctly that handheld Daemon and Bazite on the ROG Ally X allows you to do that, to give you back that control?
So for me, yes. I don't know if that's just my bias, right? But there is CPU power, CPU minimum frequency, CPU boost, GPU frequency, and you can control all of those discretely, aside from the TDP slider, which mostly functions the way that it does in SteamOS. So at the very least, I find that to be more intuitive than manual mode in ROG Ally. And I also don't really like the presets that are there for the ROG Ally. I think it's because I'm looking for more control, where I can see that, at turbo, it's using up a little too much power for my taste, but at performance, it's a little too, it's not performant enough for my taste. So I kind of want somewhere in between, and I don't want to do manual for every single game and, muck around with the fan curves and things like that. So again, I just find it to be more intuitive on Bazite, but Carrie, that's not something you've tried yet, is it?
No, but you would have a different scheduler, so Linux would have its own power schema for the ACPI table and stuff, and how it interacts with that. So you're going to find something on Linux side of things that it might not be so CPU heavy. The problem is that historically, all of these systems have always been looking at it through a CPU perspective. It's only like in the past 10 years or so that iGPUs have had any particular, anyone cared to have an iGPU on the system itself. So all of our power controls from Windows to Linux have always been CPU focused. And all the things that we're looking at are basically our tuning controls are all CPU oriented. There's nothing that is GPU oriented. There's nothing that says, at least Intel has it. They have Intel Power Balance. On AMD, they don't have that. So they're just using EPP, which is a Windows type of saying. And the only thing you're saying is you can go to EPP 0, which you're saying, all power that I'm getting, send it to the CPU. That setting, EPP 0, is high performance mode in Windows power settings. So if you go to power control in Windows, you click on high performance, it pushes all the power to the CPU, which is terrible for a handheld. You don't want that at all. Like, you want some power to be going to the GPU. So what you really want is a power saver option to be selected, which sounds counterintuitive, but Asus falls in line here. They continue going forward with this same old methodology where you use these CPU focused settings, and all of my testing reflects that as such. So it's still a thing that's a learning process that we need to still extract more performance out of this, and you would actually see better results from the updated memory bandwidth on the Ally X, because we see a clear difference between both of them. I did the benchmarks. It's a clear 17% improvement. We're like doing 78 gigs on gigabytes a second on the Ally versus like 91 gigabytes a second on the Ally X. So clearly I can test it across the entire spectrum of RAM doing 128 megabyte chunks each. So I objectively prove that
I think I need a minion that heals.
out of it. So
that.
When you look at Bazite,
Two of
that's
my
going to be
unit
an
already
power
dead.
profile, and you can tune a lot of things there as well.
It's not
Typically,
good at
it's
all.
going to be a bit better overall. How Asus has aligned it is just very, very CPU focused.
Yeah, for handheld demon, right? The
I just
power
restart. I
management,
think I should
energy
just restart.
menu there.
I think
One of
this
those
will-
is
this will
CPU
last
power, and that I think goes
any
to
longer.
being more intuitive, right? Because it's just CPU power can be low, balanced, or high.
Right.
So you don't have to think about it as power saver or
Right.
performance, right? It's I want to send less power to the CPU, then
Yeah.
I will set it to low, right? So that's where I find it to be more intuitive for me.
Yeah, the problem is again, AMD is not really selling handheld chips. They are repackaging their laptop chips, which are compute focused. You look at all of them, there's 8 CPU cores, they go up to 5.1 gigahertz, and it's just like, I don't need all of this, guys. Like, I don't need 8 cores chewing up 5 gigahertz, because that alone, if you were to just do that, that's like 50 watts for the CPU, 60 watts for the CPU alone, which we can't hit anyway. So please just chill out with pushing so much CPU on me, guys, and help me just get more GPU out of this. And that's largely what it all comes down to. And when we're talking about the conversation today, I'm doing it and I'm couching it inside the spectrum of Asus's own Armory Crate power profiles.
Yeah.
You can escape that and you can do your own thing, and I can make things a lot better, but then that's not going to reflect what a lot of people are going to be seeing. So I had to do things inside of that scope before treading outside of that.
Yeah, like you explained this, the whole thing about which profile you want to use in Windows to me, I don't know, 6-8 months ago or whatever. Like the average person who walks into a store and
they have
buys
no
something
idea.
like this, and then they take it home and they turn it on, they're going to say, well, I want to do more power. So they're going to set that setting to more power, and they're going to get a different result than somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that is a big problem.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think that all of these Windows handheld manufacturers need to try and keep in mind is explain things to the end user, because like you mentioned manual mode. When I'm in Armory Crate and I use manual mode and it brings up, it's like PPT, SPP.
Yeah, I have no
it's
idea what
like
those
alphabet
things.
soup. It's like I'm expecting Robin Williams to show up and start rattling off things.
But
like
actually,
he
in
did
Armory Crate,
Good Morning Vietnam.
it does show what those
Like,
things does.
Why?
So it can
that's
be
so confusing, and
better
nothing is explained
named.
there.
Right, yeah.
Very, very confusing if you aren't already like super dialed in, like somebody like you.
Well, yeah. Also, their manual mode sucks, so I wouldn't even recommend people use it anyway. Even if it,
What, really?
I know it's confusing, and
It's just as good as my previous
PL1
one.
and PL2, which is what Intel
Oh,
uses,
okay.
is a power limit 1, power limit 2 is a far easier thing to kind of wrap your head around than a PPT and SPPT. And what? Or even like Stapham, right? Stapham on AMD side is like, what? Skin temperature? What? Skin temperature on my CPU? Like, I don't know what that means. It's a problem that we've faced many years in the PC gaming
Somebody
handheld
that can
scene,
heals.
and there's a scene that is like, if you talk to like the dozen of us, like the 10,000 of us that are hardcore into it, this is second. That's like, oh yeah, I understand. But for a lot of people, it's a problem, and it's a growing up phase. And AMD needs to make a handheld chip. They need to make something that is more focused to be a handheld, because the biggest thing that we're always demanding more of is more GPU. We're our cup overrunneth for CPU. We just don't need more of that outside of like PS3 emulation, right? Like PS3 emulation, you can just chuck as much CPU as you want at it because it can take hold of that. But otherwise, for native PC gaming, we don't need all that.
Which is why I wanted to throw to Russ, because Russ does a lot of emulation, which is very CPU bound. Russ?
So one thing I was going to add is like there's Asus has identified that this is a thing, but also made it counterintuitive. So in their like control center, they have the ability to toggle on and off CPU boost. And it's actually on by default. When you turn on the device, it says CPU boost is on. And to an average
more
person,
unit
like,
use
all right,
vitality.
let's get more CPU, let's get more gaming, right? But like I show in my video that I play Animal Well with CPU boost off, and it pulls about 9 watts total package power, which is going to give you,
again?
gosh, what is that? Almost 10
That is
hours of battery
protection.
life.
Vitality is
More along 8, right? But if you turn
one.
CPU boost on, all of a sudden it goes up to 19 watts.
Yeah.
And you're getting like under 4 hours of gameplay. Same performance. There's no change in performance at all. It's 60 frames per second either way. But somehow you're going to get half the battery life because of the CPU boost is just pulling stuff. It's just pulling that TDP for no reason. And so that's one of the things I mentioned is just like in all scenarios, turn off CPU boost, and then in worst case scenarios, if it's just not performing the way you want, specifically like PS3 emulation or certain games, very rare, then turn it on and see what happens. But otherwise, just turn that thing off.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I mentioned in my video as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned battery life, so we may as well move on to battery life. But before we do, we had a listener send in a giveaway code. Russ, you want to set this up, and then I'll tell people how they can get this free game?
Yeah, so Twitter user by the name of Litzkrieg sent me a DM on Twitter and was like, hey, I got this game code. I'd love to give it to the community. And he's like, oh, maybe you can give it to Rich because Rich has his DMs closed and I couldn't talk to him. I'm like, oh, I'll ask him, And then Rich and I both talk. And we're like, oh, let's just put it on the Nerd Nest. That way we're both giving it away. And so the game is called Valferis Mechatarion. I don't know anything about it other than that name. But yeah, we figured we could give that away here.
Yeah, so leave a comment down below, and we're going to, a nice comment. Don't just post awful things. Leave a comment down below, and I will find somebody and reply to them with the code. And if that person will get a notification, but you could also look through the things and see if you can find it. But it's going to be down there sometime at some point so that you guys can find this free game. I don't know if this is the same game that I played, but I believe I played a game called Valferis, which is a side-scrolling, like a guy with a sword. I see you nodding, Rich. Am I right?
You're right, and this is a follow-up to that game. So apparently Mechatarion is a shmup. But it's in the same universe as the Valferis that you played, so pretty cool stuff. Yeah,
Valferis was cool when I played it.
I agree,
but I didn't play much of it because I'm me.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It actually looks really good. It's like a 2.5 side-scrolling shoot 'em up.
Let's just take the code ourselves.
All right. Never mind. Carrie took
We're gonna play it. Yeah.
All right. So battery life. We mentioned battery life. If you look at the handhelds out there, you've got the LCD Steam Deck with a 40 watt-hour battery, the ROG Ally with a 40 watt-hour battery, the OLED Steam Deck with a 50 watt-hour battery, the Legion Go with a 55 watt-hour battery, and then the ridiculous, what's the one you mentioned? The Ioneo Qun with a 75 watt-hour battery. And Asus was like, I think we'll just go 80. We'll just go all the battery.
Make it an even number.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, The one okay, there's two advantages. Okay, there's four advantages.
For
The Steam Deck.
it's getting bigger and bigger.
The exponent is exponenting.
Yeah, it just
There's
keeps
8 advantages.
There's a bunch of advantages that the Steam Deck has over all the other Windows machines, and that is battery life. But Asus found a way to evaporate that advantage because, Rich, I believe in your testing, you found it's essentially the same, right?
Yeah, on low-end games, the Steam Deck OLED still performs better. I guess we're past the embargo now, so I can be a little more. I don't have the numbers with me, but I can be a little more forthright with the numbers than I was in my videos. But I'll find the numbers. But in either case, the Steam Deck OLED still pulls ahead in low-end games. So like at under 10 watts, I know Carrie's going to have more specific numbers than that. But the Steam Deck OLED pulls ahead in those. So like Balatro, Vampire Survivors, Celeste, those games are still going to have longer battery life on the Steam Deck OLED, but the gap is so much smaller now. And the ROG Ally pulls ahead on higher end games where the total system draw between the Steam Deck OLED and the ROG Ally X is close enough that 80 watt hour battery it gives you more juice. And I can say for Horizon Zero Dawn, I was playing 1080p and I had 2.5 hours of battery life at about 95%. And that feels insane to me. 2.5 hours of battery life on a game like that at 1080p. Yeah.
Crazy. Carrie, you've done extensive battery tests for yours. I pointed my camera at the ROG Ally with a stopwatch running and put it in time-lapse mode.
Right.
You did more involved tests. Like when you are playing a game at, we'll say, silent mode, which actually we should probably mention for everybody who's watching this, silent mode went from 10 watts up to 13.
Correct.
Performance mode went from 15 to 17, and turbo is the same as it was before. But when you're in silent mode, what kind of battery life are you getting on the ROG Ally X with that giant 80 watt hour battery?
I locked them both at 10 watt just to have an accurate 1-to-1. So it wasn't running up to 13 watt. That is the default profile that the Asus Ally X will run at. So when doing that, the difference between them on the Ally, the original Ally running in silent mode, which did run at 10 watt, was a little bit north of 2 hours. So just like 2 hours and 5 minutes, 2 hours and 10 minutes. And then doing the exact same thing, same TDP, we got a little bit north of 5 hours of battery life. Now you're saying that's more than double. And you'd be correct. It is more than double. And the reason is that the Ally X actually uses less power than the Ally does, even though they have the same SoC, the same
why is
APU,
that?
and the same display. And when you put both of them, I had both of them at 50% brightness. So these things are 1-to-1 locked up, exactly the same TDP. And I have this on a graph. You can see the TDP is in lockstep between both of them. But we're getting more than double the battery life. And at lower TDPs, we're using around 1 watt less on the Ally X. And at higher TDPs, we're running around 2 watts less in total system power. So between these two, we're just getting the efficiencies of everything that Asus has done on the Ally X, likely from the fans that don't have to spin as fast and are just recreated compared to the original Ally. So from there, what we're looking at is just a whole bunch more efficiencies across the board where you're able to not only extract better battery life just from having double the battery life, but we get better battery life because Asus has gone the extra mile and engineered things a good bit better, and we're actually using less power.
So first off, they're using less power, which is probably the reason why they changed those TDP levels so that it's
correct.
It's giving you a little bit. Yeah, it's offsetting that using less power. And then you've got that giant battery. I did a test where I ran Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p on the ROG Ally. After 22 minutes, after 42 minutes, the ROG Ally just shut off. It ran out of juice. And I did the same test on the Steam Deck and the same test on the Ally X. And those two were essentially the same. Like they both lost, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but they roughly lost the exact same percentage of power over an hour of just sitting there in Night City watching people walk by with a camera pointed at it. And I was blown away at how long you can play this thing without having to worry about plugging it in. Russ, what's your experience? Pretty much the same?
Yeah, very similar. Like I didn't do a lot of benchmarking. Mostly I was focusing on just real world gameplay. So I spent, hours and hours and hours testing out dozens of games across, different platforms and everything else, just to see what I found as far as like my optimal experience. And I found that like the very lightest games, I could get upwards of 13 hours of battery life, which is just ridiculous. And then and the highest, like worst case scenario is when I'm throwing on like Hellblade, which just eats the battery, full out max graphics and trying to get 60p or 60 frames per second. And I got about an hour and 45 minutes. And that's worst case scenario. And an hour and 45 minutes of gaming is a lot of gaming, especially compared to the old Ally. And so that's kind of where I was at. I was like, this is at a point where I no longer feel constrained by the battery. Like I no longer have anxiety about it.
Yeah.
And so what I found, the real world like example of that, beyond just like the PC gaming that I can play without worrying about battery, like, oh, I should probably charge this sometime. Like being at that point, as opposed to, oh, I got to play as much as I can before the battery runs out. It's a whole new paradigm.
So close to
But then
7K. Darn it.
PS3 and Xbox
So close.
360 emulation in particular. I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to play Metal Gear Solid 4. And I'm going to do that on a handheld without worrying about battery life, without worrying about plugging it in, because I can play that through the PS3 emulator and still get over 2 hours of gameplay. And I was like, this is a whole new world to me. To play that game for 2 hours straight, not even thinking about battery life, just enjoying the game, not worrying about plugging it in. And I was like, that's a new paradigm for me. It's brute forcing a lot of that because it has 80 watts, but 80 watt hours, but still, I don't mind it. I don't care that it's not as efficient as the Steam Deck because it's giving me the amount of gameplay that I want because of that big battery. And so it's a great place to be in, and it's a new way of thinking for me in terms of handheld PCs.
Oh, where is my level?
In my video, I said something along the lines
Here?
of...
Here?
I look at the Van Gogh chipset in the Steam
Capsules.
Deck
Oh, capsules. Okay.
as like one of those
But it costs me
Japanese
50,
woodworking
50,
videos where
50,
they're
50.
slowly but surely
50 is the max.
chiseling down using a bunch of
So I'm
different
already
tools,
at the max
chiseling
party cost
down
level.
a square peg to fit through a round hole. And
Oh.
when they're done, it fits through so perfectly that you can't even like it's so elegant and beautiful how
So I
they've
could
done that.
actually
And then
already
the
get
ROG Ally X is just like the battery
7K
is
here.
just a big hammer, and they're just slamming it into that square peg and forcing it to go through that hole. And at the end of the day, I don't care which method is used, because this is just such a fantastic device, especially with that battery life. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Let's change my
Go
tune.
ahead.
I found the Bellatra hours I recorded it. It was 7.5 hours on the Steam Deck OLED, and about 6.25 hours on the ROG Ally X. So you still get another hour and a half of Bellatra, but that's only Bellatra, right? So that it's diminishing returns for the Steam Deck OLED and then flips for the Ally.
The most important game, though.
Correct. This is Bellatra. Yeah, absolutely.
This guy's really
But
good.
I
House
also think
Sentinel.
like the brute force conversation. Well, two
If
things.
I just
I'm gonna
put
come back to
all
the brute force conversation.
Sentinel.
The first thing I want to say is, I love this conversation because I don't like splitting performance and battery
Like that.
For
How
a
about
handheld.
that, huh?
I don't think it really makes
For
sense
House
to
Sentinel.
split the two. I think the two are inextricably linked, and better performance
Maybe a little bit
literally means
overkill.
better battery life, right? Like that means I can run the same. If I want to run at 30 frames per second, I can run at 30 frames per second and have the battery last longer. Like those two things are the same thing to me on a handheld. So I love this conversation. And the other thing I was going to say about brute forcing is, you're right? Like Asus definitely brute forced 80 watt hours, but there's this nuance to that where like that part they brute forced, but they made it lighter, right? Like that engineering was not a matter of brute force, right? Like that was finesse. That was the Japanese woodworking where they were
Yes.
somehow able to keep it as light as it is today, as light as it is now, with that 80 watt hour battery. That is mind blowing. So there's a lot of finesse in here too. So I'm impressed with what they've done.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, but the ROG Ally X is only 70 grams heavier than the ROG Ally. Am I remembering that number correctly?
Like roundabout, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but the thing
like
is that the
crazy.
battery is like 160 grams heavy.
Grams heavier.
Oh.
So
yeah.
they
Right.
Pretty
cut
cool.
all these other things
Yeah.
to kind of balance it out. And so I think that's what Riz is talking about.
Yeah, it's really just a marvel of engineering that they've done. And the best part about it is that the one part that I love, because I've been asking for 80 watt hour batteries forever now, like 2020 when the WinMax 1 first came out. I have a video where I was like, I want this to be bigger, I want a bigger battery, and the comments were like, you're insane. And I'm finally happy that someone has min-maxed the entire thing, where they're looking at every individual component and seeing how far they can push each individual
No, I
component
really feel like I want to get
in
a
any given regard
LIX.
to fit the whole. And that is where the Asus ROG Ally X is. Despite that it only has the same chip, you have everything else that makes the whole thing so much better. And the display, even being the same, is still an excellent display for PC gaming handhelds, especially on the Windows side. Being native landscape and also having VRR, those two things are absolutely critical. And one of the things that I was always hesitant and afraid for VRR on a PC gaming handheld. My worst fear in my head was no one's going to try to optimize to hit a frame cap. Like on the Steam Deck, you say put this at 30 FPS and then the battery will swing to accommodate that. And VRR in my head was people aren't going to care. They're just going to push a number as hard as they can and have this fluctuating frame rate and have the display sorted out. I'm like, they're going to get terrible battery life. But in that same vein, I've just been using performance mode. I just say performance mode and then also turn off the CPU boost, which I also touch base on. And it's like, those are things that like are easy solutions that they are available to us right now. But all of that, it's such... They dropped the hammer, right? They to go back to what you said, Bill. They did drop a hammer to everyone else in the industry that now they have to make an 80 watt hour device minimum and have this 680 gram cap. Like this is now everyone else's problem to solve, and they have to do better than this. And that's what I really love about the Ally X.
And they did it in a year.
Yeah.
So because they like. If you look at their marketing for the original ROG Ally, one of the things that they kept saying is that we wanted it to be light.
Right.
And then we all said, no, make it last longer, make it a little bit heavier. We will be fine. And they listened and they made it a little
really
bit heavier,
cool.
but somehow,
So cool.
like if you take the battery out of this and you take the battery out of the ROG Ally and put them on the scale, this is a lighter device than that. It's crazy that they were able to do that kind of engineering in a year. Now I'm sure that they probably started that beforehand. Like this feels like this is what they wanted to do originally. And somebody in a boardroom said, you know what, it's going to be too heavy. Let's make sure that we don't make it too heavy. And so they didn't do what they wanted. What's that, Karen?
I'm pretty sure I mentioned this once before, but when I went to Asus's headquarters in Taipei, they were going through and showing us different stuff, and we were talking to the people that made the new fans, and they're like, here's the PQ curve for the new ones and the old ones. You can see that we're lighter, we're better, we use less power. And I'm like, that's 3 wins. Like, there's no loss. Like, why didn't you guys just do that to begin with? Like, why do you purposely put bad fans in this? And they're like, oh, money. And I was like, what? They're like, this is a solvable problem. We just didn't know that we needed to solve it. So then we put money into the problem and then we solved it. And I was like, oh, all right. So
in a year.
Yeah. I love that they just basically got together, talked to the whole company, and they said, you're going to make the best fan and heatsink solution possible, because the heatsink's actually thinner and lighter compared to the original Ally, but the heat pipes are wider. So it's overall a better solution that's lighter, uses less power, and is better. And it's just like, what are you doing there, guys? Like, this should have been solved a while ago.
It goes back to the chipset conversation you were having before, right? Like, it's kind of fascinating that we've gotten this far with handhelds without having like
a real
a real chipset that is for a handheld. So like if AMD or Intel or Nvidia really just drew their money at this specific problem, I think we would see leaps and bounds of improvement.
That's what it's always been. We're getting the scraps from AMD. AMD is just like, hey, we have a laptop chip. Why don't we just give them that? And everyone's like, that's a genius move.
Would you say that the Van Gogh processor is
it's
a laptop chip?
No.
That's a handheld chip.
That's a handheld chip.
Isn't the Van Gogh a chip that was already manufactured?
Oh, finally, 7700. This guy's really good.
Magic Leap.
Let's go.
Thing that little kids
The
play
VR
with.
thing. What's the VR thing?
Magic Leap 2 was an NVIDIA X2. That's
so. What's X2?
The second generation of the Nintendo chip.
There was like a VR thing that I think Van Gogh is in. And I was going to say, wasn't Van Gogh slated to be in a Surface?
Yes, it was.
And
that is the whole story with Van Gogh to begin with. Everyone was like, oh, Van Gogh is on AMD's roadmap, and it kind of just sits in like a weird little nebulous space. And it's like, oh, Microsoft is going to get that. And then in like November of 2019, they're like, oh, it's canceled. Van Gogh's
just
canceled.
hide somewhere.
And then in 2020 of January, all of a sudden Van Gogh started being in the Linux kernel, and people were like, wait, I thought this was canceled. Like, what's going on? And like that period of time is when Valve got a hold of Van Gogh, and that's
it's hard to say it's a handheld chip, right? Like it still feels like I know Valve had it tailored to their needs, but it just feels like we still have more of a ways to go.
Yeah, so 100%, like. Right, like the next leap on here is that we put memory on package, we put Wi-Fi on package, we put everything on package, like how a mobile phone is. Like you look at Qualcomm stuff, everything's on package, and when you put the thing in standby time is great. You're not powering a separate subsystem from your Wi-Fi chip on another part of it. All of that is contained on package. So yeah, the optimal handheld chip would be something that is all on package and then controlled in such a way. So yeah. Look through that lens, absolutely. But from just a CPU and GPU oriented fashion, the Van Gogh chipset only having 4 cores on CPU and a bigger, beefier GPU side, it is a better balanced chip specifically for like gaming rather than for compute, like CPU compute.
Yep. Yeah, well, I would really, we talk about battery life. I would love to see the Van Gogh chipset in with an 80 watt hour battery. That's overkill at that point. Like, how much gameplay time do you really need?
Oh, all of it.
Gary needs it.
Oh, dude, like Asus, like let's ask that question. Let's ask that question. Now that Asus has made the Ally X with an 80 watt hour battery, we know that MSI with the AI 8 Claw 2 has an 80 watt hour battery. So now effectively we have 2 handhelds from 2 big manufacturers with 80 watt hour batteries. What is Valve going to do for the Steam Deck 2 in battery capacity? Are they going to match them, or are they going to peel it back? I think that they're going to match them and do the same min-maxing to try to get the shell and everything else as lightweight as possible and do exactly what they're doing. Or even solid-state batteries, which is a separate thing.
There's a lot of empty space in the Steam Deck. There's a lot of empty space. All right, let's talk about what would you change about the ROG Ally X. Russ, I'm going to start with you. What would you change about this device? Because I, for one, don't have a whole lot to say about that.
Yeah, so I would, even though I like that they added I think it's like 4 or 5 millimeters to the overall grip, I could do with another 4 or 5, like make it Steam Deck-esque, I wouldn't mind that. It's going to make it a little bulkier, but who cares, And then second, and I think you guys will all disagree, I would like a white color option. That's it.
I don't know that I disagree. That I just wouldn't want, if it's an option, I don't care what colors are available. I just wouldn't, if I were shopping, I would not buy a white one. I would, however, buy one that was like some other color. Like, if for the people who are listening to the podcast, Rich has this pink blue hue on the wall behind him. I think that would look fantastic as a shell where it's like blue on one side and pink on the other, and a slow gradation across. I think that would look fantastic. Rich, what would you change about the Ally X?
I changed it. would be Windows.
Okay, there you go. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I just really like the SteamOS experience. I definitely understand, obviously, like the benefits of Windows, Game Pass, Fortnite, Destiny 2. These are all things that just don't matter to me very much. But I really like the SteamOS experience. I think it's just very convenient. There are things like, games launching sometimes in Windows in windowed mode, and sometimes they're like small windows. Actually, Bill, well, by now your videos come out. You mentioned this, right? For Sonic, one of the Sonic games, where it just opens up as a very tiny window, and you have to like figure, get it full screen and stuff like that. So there's little things like that that just work better on SteamOS, and that it fits my gaming style a lot more. So I installed Bazite, and there were a number of problems when I first installed it, just, being new hardware, right? So like the controls weren't mapped quite correctly, the speakers weren't working, things like that. I was lucky enough to reach out through High Tech Low Life to one of the Bazite devs, and we ended up in a group chat with some other devs of other software that goes upstream to Bazite, like Handheld Demon, which we were talking about earlier. And in short order, they fixed a lot of those issues. So I was very happy to have a basically fully functional Bazite. And to me, not only better than Windows, but I think right now it operates, the experience that I'm having is mostly better than the Steam Deck experience with SteamOS.
Is there anything remaining that they need to fix?
There's still a reconnect. There's still like a suspend resume bug.
Okay.
And in fact, there was like a little regression with that. But basically, when you suspend resume, it has to like reconnect everything. And one of the things it has to reconnect are the controls. And sometimes it just does not reconnect. So you have to like suspend resume again, or you have to cold boot it. And
VRR works through like GameScope on there. Nice. That's so sweet.
VRR works. Yep.
GameScope is the best.
That's great.
It's great. Yeah.
It is. So Rich told me about this, and so I had ordered a 4 terabyte M.2 drive. It arrived on Wednesday, and then basically that was my Thursday. My Thursday was I installed the 4 terabyte M.2 drive in this, and then did a cloud recovery to Windows because I wasn't sure what to do. Like,
right.
I did a cloud recovery to Windows. Then I downloaded Bazite and installed it. And I'm going to tell people, listen, if I can figure it out, you can figure it out, because I am not super techie. Okay. So I got Bazite installed. It's not a difficult process, but it is a process. Like, it's not simply like double click a thing and you're all set. Mm-hmm. There is a bunch of stuff to go through. You're going to want to have a keyboard and all this stuff. But I ended up going through the thing, getting it all set up. And then now when I just turn it on, it's just like SteamOS. It takes a second to boot up. You can see there's Emulation Station right there. It boots right into SteamOS, and it feels just like SteamOS. The only difference is, like, we don't use the quick access menu to change our TDP. If you double tap that button, it brings up Handheld Daemon, and then you can change your TDP and get those options there. But it works fantastically well. And I'm the person who said over and over, I will not be installing anything until Valve releases SteamOS officially. Well, I got sick of waiting, and so I ended up installing it, and it feels just like SteamOS, which
I'm gonna
is
say
awesome.
There's no reason to wait. If you are someone that wants the SteamOS experience on another device, any other device, I don't think there's a reason to wait for Valve to do it. Now that I've really had some time with Bazite, I think, the other distros like Chimera and perhaps Hollow ISO, I feel like I haven't dug into it enough, but I keep getting this sentiment from other people that Hollow ISO isn't being maintained enough. So I feel like Chimera OS and Bazite have a lot more care given to them. What I was going to say, though, was all of those benefits from Bazite, they're going to end up in Chimera as well, either because they are in upstream dependencies, or because it's open source, so the developers of Chimera OS can look to Bazite for some of those features.
Is Mango HUD working just fine? Like same type of presets?
Just fine.
Oh, yeah. Cool. That's awesome.
100%. Yeah.
So
Bill, on your 4
it
terabyte...
looks a little smaller. It looks a little smaller because of the higher resolution screen. What were you saying, Russ?
On your 4 terabyte drive, sorry to interrupt, but your 4 terabyte drive, is it only Bazite, or do you dual booting? Like, what are you doing with that?
So Rich went through and did dual booting.
Right.
My Windows drive is sitting right here on my desk. Like, this is my Windows drive. So if I want to swap over to Windows, I'll just put this in, but I don't see myself doing that. I figured I'm going all in on Bazite, and I'm just going to main that. And there were times when I was making my video, or when I was working on editing my video, and I was like, damn it, there was a thing that I wanted to do on Windows, and it's too much of a pain in the ass to switch over. I guess I just won't include that in my video because I didn't feel like taking the back off and swapping the drive. But it's super easy, and it's all, I have so many games on here. It's insane. Like if I look on, oh, there's the bug right there. You could see it's not lighting up, so my controls didn't connect. So I'm going to turn it off. And then I wait for the screen to go black, and then I'll turn it back on, and we'll see if it works or not. But it'll take a second. Come on, turn on the little lights. There we go. So now it worked. So if I go into my settings and I go down to storage somewhere, there we go. I went through my entire list, and I was like, oh, we'll install that, we'll install that, we'll install that. And right now my games on this are 970 gigs. My DLC is 57.46 gigs. I've got 17 gigs of shaders on here. My non-Steam games are 385. It's a little hard to read. 385 gigs, because I've got like a lot of that stuff. And if I don't know if this will show up on screen, but if you look, I haven't even hit 50% yet.
Space, yeah.
I have so much space. And M.2 drives for 2280s are so cheap compared to the 2230s or the 2245s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I bought a 4 terabyte. My plan is, probably to dual boot, because I still need probably a terabyte for Windows, which I'll put like Destiny and all those Windows games on there. So I can kind of swap between the two. That's going to be a future video. I still got a lot more work to do on just the regular LIX, but yeah.
Can I say also, sorry, one quick thing is, I said this in my video, but it bears repeating. The LIX can do both. That's what's wild to me, right? Is that Valve has not released the Windows drivers for OLED yet. Thankfully, they exist for the LCD. So if you have the LCD, you can do both if you like. But for the OLED, you cannot do both. You are stuck with SteamOS, which is fantastic. But it would be nice if you were able to do both.
Yeah.
Sorry, Karen, what were you going to say?
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Oh, no, the only thing I was going to say is that there's an avenue here where you don't really have to dual boot so much, insofar as there already is KVM QEMU, and you could effectively containerize Windows and then pass through the GPU to Windows, so that you're in Linux and using all the Linux stuff, and then just kind of making a window into Windows, and then using that with all of the resources that are there. And then you wouldn't have to really dual boot worry so much. Let me get out of here and go into Windows and load up all that crap. You could just, press a button inside of Steam Launcher and then launch Windows, which is a technical possibility. That'd be pretty cool.
But are you saying, without having, like, right now, I do not have Windows on this drive at all, I could do that? Or I would also have to have Windows compartmentalized, like for a terabyte or something on its own?
No, yeah. Well, I mean, you'd have to give, it's just a virtual machine, right? That's all it'd be.
So, okay, just a virtual machine in Linux.
Yeah.
Not doing anything. That's interesting.
Yeah, so then you just pass through the GPU through IOMMU, which is supported on the platform, and then it has the GPU and has all the other CPU with virtualization extensions and all the other stuff. I mean, Microsoft already does with Xbox, right? All the games run inside of VM containers, so all of this stuff is technically possible. It would be really cool. It'd be really cool, and something that I tried doing a long time ago, but never just kind of got out of gas, just like doing it. Like, what am I doing here? Let's install Windows.
Yeah, that's right. Real quick, we mentioned what would we change. We don't need to answer this, but everybody is going to leave comments saying, I can't believe you didn't say change the screen to OLED.
Please do.
I understand. I would love the screen to be OLED, but this screen is already really good.
I can
like that's the last thing that they needed to change on the Ally.
I can speak to that a little bit. I get confused because I feel like I've had the conversation already. In Taipei, they actually went through all of the stuff about doing OLED.
Yeah.
And the main reason that they didn't at the time is that an OLED display in the same configuration would burn 2.5 times the power that the display on the Ally already uses. So it was a power consumption concern from their angle, largely from the thing that drives the display, not so much OLED itself, like the emissiveness of it, literally the IC that controls it and all the stuff that is going on would require more power than what is on the Ally as it is right now on the Ally X.
So why isn't that the case on the Steam Deck OLED?
It's a MIPI-based
it's
display.
more efficient.
It's a MIPI-based display and not a EDP VRR display.
Oh, okay. So if you're saying if it's an OLED and a VRR display, uses more power. But if it's an OLED, not a VRR display, then it uses less power.
The current iterations of how they drive those displays take a certain amount of power with how they drive the display in certain different configurations. Like if you have like a mosaic, like a checkerboard layout, so like all black, all white, all black, like there's different powering levels depending on how much is being driven, but the IC itself is kind of driving all of that along with the emissiveness. Both of those things together, they had a big old graph and all the other stuff showing me, because that was like the number one thing we all talked about. We were like, why don't we have OLED? And I was like, the G16 and G14 OLED displays that you have on your laptops are sick. So
amazing.
Yeah, so if you could just do that, that would have been like killer. And they went through the whole thing, and we also talked about mini LED, and mini LED is even worse in power over OLED. So she was just like laughed it out of the room. She was like, no. We wouldn't. I would rather just go OLED instead of that. So I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know. Like, I don't have any of this stuff. So like, it was really a fruitful conversation to have. But it's those little things that matter. And then, like we just talked about with the Ally X using less total system power, that would have actually got gobbled up and then some by the OLED display.
Do you guys have like a strong preference for either display, either the Steam Deck OLED or the Ally X? Yeah, I'm like Ross,
from a color perspective, no. Like I'll do this in the video too. Is like the Ally X is good enough, and that's good enough for me. You know what I mean? And I like the 120 hertz in VRR, so for me it's like I don't mind not getting it changed.
Yeah, the Steam Deck OLED display, I love especially the HDR side of it. When you have that's like super nice when it's working. However, and Steam Deck doesn't have this problem, right? Like, even though it's a native portrait display, because GameScope is already handling all the permutations of how the frame buffer is getting output, we don't have any worries in Linux. However, in Windows, when you run older games, it's a problem, and it's been a problem. And I've talked with so many people that wanted to play older games. Like, I mean, it's over like 100 people that are like, hey, this game breaks whenever I try to run it. It's like, oh yeah, you have to just get DG Voodoo 2 and just put the APIs in there and then just run it because it'll convert open, it's like this whole thing, right? And even with like Red Dead Redemption 2, if you try to use Vulkan as your backend on a native portrait display on Windows, you're just going to have like the window just like chunked over and like hard set in one area. It's like, oh, I guess I'll only use DirectX 12 in this. And on a VRR EDP display with native landscape, you don't have that issue. There's lots of little things that Windows like just anticipates having a native landscape display, that when you give it a native portrait display, lots of wonky things happen. And technically lots of wonky things happen on Windows when you use like resolution scaling as well. Like if you do like 300% resolution scaling, that's not ideal either in Windows. You should always be at 100% resolution scale. So there's just things that Windows does a little bit goofy insofar as the Windows desktop, the desktop Windows Manager, DWM, on Windows, and they do need to improve a lot. But that's why from a Windows PC handheld perspective, the display on the Ally is preferable compared to pretty much everything else, unless they are using the same exact display, like the Claw or the GP2 Win Mini. Well,
if you look at the Steam Deck, when that first launched, that was the biggest thing that everybody said. This screen is not good. It was not a good screen. It was washed out colors. It was fine because I wasn't comparing it to anything. But as soon as I compared it to something, I was like, oh, okay, I can see it. It's bad. And so when they updated and put in an OLED display, I was like, yeah, they had to, they didn't have to put OLED in, but they had to do something because that screen was bad. When the ROG Ally first came out, the first thing everybody said was, this screen is amazing. And you get a lot of people who say, I don't want it if it's not OLED. And I think that those people are going to miss out on a really good device.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right. So my next question, we had the Steam Deck. They followed up with the OLED Steam Deck. Fantastic follow-up. Do you think that this is a good follow? Do you think it's as good a follow-up as the OLED Steam Deck is to the original Steam Deck? Rich, I'm going to start with you.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's at least as good as the Steam Deck OLED, the jump from Steam Deck LCD to Steam Deck OLED. For me, ROG Ally wasn't super attractive, wasn't a super attractive option the more I played with it. So I kind of immediately went back to the Steam Deck LCD and eventually Steam Deck OLED. But I think the jump, I think that's part of why this jump is so good for me, right? Like the ergonomics, the battery life, which again to me really does translate to performance, because I didn't really feel like I was getting the performance I wanted out of the ROG Ally, specifically because of that battery anxiety that Russ was talking about earlier. I didn't feel like it was worth it to me to play Cyberpunk at that level. Now I feel like it's worth it to me. So yeah, I think this is at least as good of a jump as the Steam Deck LCD to the Steam Deck OLED.
Russ?
Yeah, same. I think it is a good follow-up.
The
biggest thing for me is that it's a big indication that Asus is investing in the platform, that they are in it for the long haul, because they said, okay, you know what, we tried out the Ally, and now we are investing time and money in improving it. And all of this is just an investment for the Ally 2.
Up yet.
And so I think the Ally 2 will be coming, and we're going to get all these jumps into that one as well. And so that's probably the biggest thing for me. It's like, all right, Asus is in this, and they know handhelds. And so I really like this idea, and that we're getting not, the Steam Deck to the OLED was a nice jump in terms of